On what should have been the happiest day of her life, the bride, adorned in a flawless white gown, stood surrounded by friends and family, steps from the aisle. The air was filled with anticipation and joy as her loved ones celebrated the union that was about to take place. However, just as the final preparations were being made, a dark shadow approached. Within moments, the scene of love and happiness turned into a nightmare. The guests, shocked and bewildered, could barely comprehend what had just happened. This was no accident. Video footage captured every horrific detail, revealing a deliberate and calculated act of violence. The ensuing trial became a media sensation, warping public perception with dramatic claims and counterclaims. Often, the people we believe we know best, those we live with, share our lives and hearts with, turn out to be complete strangers. The most terrifying truth emerges when relationships crumble, and someone we once loved reveals their darkest self, channeling anger and hatred in ways unimaginable. Such was the tragic fate of a woman whose only crime was seeking love and happiness, Gladys Ricart. Gladys's story was one of triumph over adversity, of unshakable will in the face of overwhelming odds. But beneath her success lay scars from the past that shaped her views on love. Cautious and guarded, she did not rush into relationships. It wasn't until much later in life, when she had firmly established herself as a professional and as a mother, that she met a man who seemed to be everything she had hoped for. He appeared kind, attentive, and shared her immigrant experience. They seemed to understand each other in ways that made Gladys believe she had finally found the happiness she deserved. But appearances, as Gladys would tragically discover, can be deceiving. Beneath his polished surface lay the heart of a man consumed by control, jealousy, and rage. What began as a relationship filled with promise would unravel into a nightmare, culminating in an unspeakable act of violence that no one could have predicted. Dear viewers, liking, commenting, and subscribing only takes a few seconds, but it means so much to us. Every click and comment fuels our passion. Thanks. Gladys Ricart was born on December 19, 1960 in a small province of the Dominican Republic. Gladys was the youngest of 3 children. Her family, though not wealthy, was loving and hardworking. She was raised alongside her older sister Norma and her brother Juan. From a young age, her parents instilled in her the value of education and the dream of a better future, one far removed from the poverty and limitations of their homeland. Norma, the eldest, had already taken the leap. In the mid-1970s, she moved to New York City, found work, and began building a new life. She became a beacon of hope for her family back in the Dominican Republic, and Gladys idolized her. Her greatest ambition was to follow in her sister's footsteps and pursue the same dream, a fresh start in America. But life rarely follows a straight path. In her teens, Gladys fell in love with a boy from her school. At 17, she became pregnant. When she broke the news, her boyfriend abruptly disappeared from her life, leaving her alone with the responsibility. Yet, Gladys made a courageous choice. She decided to keep the baby, naming her son Davis, and her family supported her wholeheartedly. Though the relationship with her first love had ended in heartbreak, her love for her child became her greatest motivation. Living at home with her parents, who helped care for Davis, Gladys worked tirelessly. Her goal was clear: to save enough money to join Norma in the United States and start anew. It would take 4 years of sacrifice and determination to achieve that dream. But when the time came, she left her son behind temporarily, trusting her parents to care for him until she could afford to bring him with her. In the summer of 1982, Gladys arrived in New York City. She moved in with Norma and her family, settling into their Manhattan apartment. The transition was not easy. She was in a country where she barely spoke the language and had no professional qualifications that could land her a good-paying job. But Gladys was determined to succeed. She immediately began taking English classes and accepted any work that came her way. She washed dishes in restaurants at night, handed out flyers during the day, and took on shifts at supermarkets whenever she could. Though the work was hard, Gladys never lost sight of her dreams. As soon as her English improved, she enrolled in college, continuing to juggle multiple jobs to pay her way through. Her perseverance paid off when she landed her first accounting job at a New York company. That was just the beginning. After graduating from college, she enrolled in a prestigious university to study economics, determined to rise even higher. By 1985, Gladys Ricart's life had taken a positive and promising turn. She had secured a stable, well-paying job And though she was still pursuing her degree at the university, she was already standing on her own 2 feet. She rented her own apartment in a good neighborhood and had begun saving for a home of her own. The greatest joy for her at that moment was that she was finally able to bring her son Davis from the Dominican Republic to live with her. He had been living with her parents up until then. But now, with her career and finances in good shape, Gladys could reunite her family under one roof. This was a significant step forward, a reward for years of hard work and perseverance. After earning her degree, Gladys's career soared. She became the chief accountant of a major travel company based in Manhattan, a role that showcased her skills and established her as an indispensable employee. Her dedication to her craft and her relentless drive for success earned her a sterling reputation. By this time, she had become fluent in English, even managing to erase most traces of her accent, further solidifying her position in a competitive professional environment. A few years later, Gladys's achievements extended beyond her career. With the support of her sister Norma, she helped bring their brother Juan, along with his wife, 3 daughters, and their elderly parents, to New York. It was a time of family reunification and celebration. Juan, too, settled into the city, found a good job, and, like his sisters, began building a better life. Their children attended prestigious schools, and the entire family was flourishing. They were closely knit, frequently gathering for dinners and celebrations, and always ready to support one another in times of need. The Ricart family, now all living in Manhattan, enjoyed the fruits of their labor, having built a life far better than any of them had imagined back in the Dominican Republic. By the early 1990s, Gladys had achieved nearly everything she had ever dreamed of. She had a prestigious job, a comfortable apartment, a son who was thriving in school, and her family nearby, each living a secure and fulfilling life. She had worked hard, climbed the career ladder, and ensured her loved ones were well taken care of. The only piece missing from her otherwise perfect life was personal happiness, a loving relationship that could complete the picture she had worked so hard to create. Having been burned by her first relationship in her youth, Gladys approached romance with caution. Her early experience, being left alone with a child and no financial support, had shaped her into a careful, selective woman when it came to matters of the heart. She had always prioritized her son and her career, striving to create a stable and comfortable life for Davis. Friends and colleagues often saw her as a career-driven woman, assuming she would sacrifice her personal life for continued professional success. She rarely dated, spending most of her time focused on work or with her family. However, deep down, Gladys never stopped hoping for love. She dreamed of meeting a kind, dependable man, of building a family, and of finally allowing herself the happiness she had long postponed. One warm autumn morning, while commuting to work on the subway, Gladys's life took an unexpected turn. It was on this ride that she met the man she believed could finally fulfill her dreams. He was Agustin Garcia, a 41-year-old who seemed perfect in every way. Their encounter began innocently enough. Agustin offered her his seat, a small but gallant gesture that caught her attention. When another seat became available, he sat next to her, and their conversation began. Agustin was charming, witty, and personable. He complimented Gladys with sincerity, and his humor made her smile. As they talked, they discovered a shared history. Like her, Agustin had also immigrated from the Dominican Republic. This connection seemed like fate, a sign that they were meant to meet. By the time the subway reached their stop, they had exchanged phone numbers, and Gladys couldn't help but feel that something special had begun. Their casual conversation that morning was the spark that ignited what she believed would be a lasting romance. From that moment on, their relationship blossomed quickly. Agustin's charisma and attentiveness made Gladys feel special and appreciated in a way she hadn't experienced in years. He showered her with attention, making her believe that after all the years of hard work and sacrifice, she had finally found the partner she deserved. What she didn't know was that behind Agustin's charm lay a darkness she could never have anticipated, a darkness that would soon reveal itself in the most tragic way possible. Agustin Garcia, like Gladys, was born in the Dominican Republic, but his early life was marked by hardship and struggle. Born in February 1951, he grew up in a poor neighborhood, never knowing his father and losing his mother at a young age. After her death, Agustin realized that he had to take drastic steps to change the course of his life. In the mid-1970s, he made the bold decision to immigrate to the United States, determined to build a better future for himself. Arriving with little more than ambition, Agustin worked tirelessly to carve out a place for himself in this foreign land. He took on menial jobs, learned English, and eventually began to build a name for himself. Garcia's personal experiences shaped his empathetic approach to life. Having struggled to establish himself in America, he became deeply invested in helping other immigrants facing similar challenges. He remembered all too well the isolation, the language barriers, and the difficulty of finding work. By the early 1980s, Agustin had become a prominent figure within New York's Dominican community. He helped countless people by offering assistance in securing jobs, housing, and language lessons, all while growing his own business into a thriving enterprise. His company, based in the heart of Manhattan, was successful, and his personal life reflected his professional achievements. He owned a luxurious two-story house in an affluent neighborhood, drove expensive cars, and even had a yacht. Despite his material success, Garcia remained grounded, using his wealth and influence to uplift his fellow countrymen. By 1985, Agustin's influence had expanded well beyond the community. He became the head of the Dominican Chamber of Commerce in New York, a role that allowed him to have an even broader impact. In addition to his business ventures, Garcia was involved in numerous charitable activities. He spearheaded initiatives that led to the opening of schools, kindergartens, English language training centers, and employment programs for immigrants. His reputation as a generous, kind-hearted man was well known. Always ready to listen, he never turned away anyone who came to him for help. He even used his own funds to help families in need and treated many community members like family. Agustin was, in every sense, a self-made man. He had been married but was now divorced, raising his two sons alone after a bitter custody battle. Despite the personal challenges he faced, Agustin remained outwardly charming and personable. He was admired for his business acumen, community leadership, and apparent kindness. It was out of sheer coincidence that Garcia, who normally never used public transport, found himself on the subway that fateful day. His car was being repaired, and with Manhattan traffic at a standstill, the subway was his only option to get to an important meeting on time. It was there that he first laid eyes on Gladys Ricart, and in that brief moment, his life would take a dramatic turn. Gladys, with her poised and elegant demeanor, caught Agustin's attention immediately. She stood out, a graceful figure in an expensive business suit, a picture of success and confidence. Agustin, always assertive and quick to act, took the opportunity to introduce himself. Their initial conversation was light and casual, but it quickly became clear that they had much in common. Both were immigrants who had overcome immense odds to succeed in the United States, and both had struggled in their personal lives, raising children as single parents after failed relationships. By the time the subway ride ended, Agustin had asked for her phone number and given her his business card, on which he had scribbled not only his office contact but also his personal home number, a gesture that indicated how seriously he took this chance meeting. Throughout the rest of that day, Agustin couldn't stop thinking about the beautiful stranger he had met. That evening, as soon as he got home, he called her. To his delight, Gladys answered, and they continued their conversation. He invited her to dinner at an upscale restaurant that weekend, and without hesitation, she accepted. Their first date confirmed everything Gladys had sensed about Agustin. He appeared to be the perfect gentleman, kind, attentive, and full of charm. He listened intently to her stories, complimented her on her intelligence and grace, and treated her with respect and admiration. To Gladys, it seemed as though fate had finally brought her the man she had long hoped for. Agustin was generous, educated, and thoughtful, qualities she deeply valued. Beyond their shared heritage, they seemed to have similar outlooks on life, and their conversations flowed easily. Agustin presented himself as the ideal partner. He was intelligent, well-established, and had a seemingly kind heart. He showered Gladys with attention, treating her with a gallantry that she had rarely experienced before. He took her to fine restaurants, bought her thoughtful gifts, and always made her feel special. Their backgrounds, both having immigrated from the Dominican Republic and built successful lives in a foreign country, gave them an instant bond. The fact that both had endured failed relationships and were now raising children alone seemed like further proof that they were meant to be together. But as the relationship progressed, what had started as a fairy tale romance soon began to take a darker turn. Agustin, for all his outward charm and generosity, harbored a deep possessiveness and a volatile temper, qualities that would ultimately surface in devastating ways. To Gladys, however, these warning signs were subtle, hidden behind the veneer of a man who appeared to be everything she had ever wanted. Little did she know that the man she thought was her perfect match would soon become her worst nightmare. The relationship between Ricard and Garcia unfolded with breathtaking speed. They spoke on the phone every day, shared intimate moments, and soon became inseparable, spending all their free time together. Agustin played the role of the perfect suitor, showering Gladys with extravagant gifts, from luxurious bouquets of flowers to expensive jewelry. He took her to high-end restaurants, where the finest cuisine was always paired with compliments that left her blushing. Agustin also won over Gladys's family, quickly establishing a rapport with her relatives and even her son, Davis. For the first time in a long while, Gladys's family felt that she had finally found the happiness she deserved. Garcia's own children seemed to accept her well, and a year into their relationship, Agustin made a significant move. He asked her to move in with him. For Gladys, this was a dream come true. She and Davis packed up and moved out of their modest apartment, stepping into Agustin's massive house, a symbol of their newfound life together. But what initially seemed like a fairy tale quickly unraveled into something much darker. Agustin's sons, who were older than Davis, began tormenting him. They bullied him relentlessly, provoking fights and creating a hostile environment. Despite the obvious tension and the fact that his sons were always the aggressors, Agustin consistently sided with them, ignoring the damage being done to Davis. At the time, more than ever, Gladys dreamed of marriage. She confided in her family about her hopes that Agustin would propose soon and that they would become a proper family. She urged her son to avoid conflict with Garcia's children, and although Davis tried his best, the constant harassment made it impossible for him to live in peace. Gladys could see the toll it was taking on her son, who was on the cusp of adolescence. She feared that the toxic environment in the house would leave lasting emotional scars on him. Determined to protect Davis, she decided to confront Agustin about the escalating situation. But to her dismay, he brushed off her concerns. He believed the children would resolve their issues on their own and saw no reason to intervene. Faced with Agustin's refusal to acknowledge the problem, Gladys made the difficult decision to move out for the sake of her son's well-being. Agustin, surprisingly, accepted this without much protest. He insisted that he did not want their relationship to end, and even rented a spacious house for her and Davis. However, living apart began to change the dynamics between them. Slowly, Agustin's once charming persona began to crumble, revealing a far more controlling side. Not long after they started living separately, Agustin's behavior took a sharp turn toward the possessive. He demanded constant contact, insisting that Gladys be reachable at all times. If he called her at home or work, she had to answer immediately. His once gentle demeanor morphed into something more insidious as he began closely monitoring her every move. He scrutinized her friendships, kept a close eye on her social interactions, and became increasingly suspicious of her behavior. Agustin's interrogations started innocently enough. He'd ask about her day, who she had spoken to, where she had been. But soon, his questions became more invasive and accusatory. Despite these troubling signs, the outward appearance of their relationship remained much the same. Agustin still lavished Gladys with gifts, continued to take her to elegant restaurants, and accompanied her on vacations. To her family, Agustin was practically a member of the family, and Gladys herself held on to the hope that he would eventually propose. She clung to the idea that their relationship would return to what it had once been, believing that the man she had fallen in love with would soon make her his wife. But as the months turned into years, it became clear that Agustin had no intention of marrying her. Instead, he tightened his grip, becoming a full-fledged tyrant in their relationship. He restricted Gladys's freedom, trying to control her every action. Whenever she attempted to assert herself, he manipulated the situation, making her feel guilty for even the smallest infractions. Garcia's once gallant exterior had completely faded, leaving behind a man who was obsessive, possessive, and domineering. Gladys, still clinging to the hope of a marriage proposal, found herself trapped in a toxic relationship with a man who had no plans to give her the future she longed for. When Gladys finally confronted Agustin about marriage, his response crushed her hopes. He coldly stated that marriage was not part of his future plans, explaining that after his failed first marriage, he had no intention of tying the knot again. Gladys had invested years into their relationship, so she clung to the hope that Agustin would change his mind. However, over time, it became increasingly clear that he had no such intentions. Worse yet, rumors of his infidelity began to surface. Agustin was having affairs, and although he tried to keep them secret, they eventually came to light. To the public, he presented Gladys as his wife, but behind her back, he was unfaithful. When Gladys finally discovered his cheating, she decided to break up with him. But when she attempted to leave, Agustin's reaction was terrifying. In a fit of rage, he pulled out a gun and threatened to kill her if she ever left him. It was in that chilling moment that she realized the true extent of the danger she was in. She had spent years with a man who was capable of monstrous violence, and the fear of what he might do kept her trapped for another agonizing year. It wasn't until November 1998, after catching him in the act of cheating in his office, that she found the strength to end the relationship for good. This time, she told him unequivocally that it was over. Agustin didn't try to deny his infidelity, nor did he believe that Gladys would truly walk away. But just days after their final confrontation, she moved out of the house he had rented for her, seeking safety and distance. She informed her family of the breakup, hoping to finally be free of him. Initially, Agustin refused to accept the breakup. He made desperate attempts to win her back, bombarding her with phone calls and trying to arrange meetings. He left gifts, flowers, and even a Bible at her doorstep, all laced with declarations of love. But Gladys was resolute. She had no interest in rekindling their toxic relationship and made it clear she had moved on. However, what she didn't know was that Agustin's obsession had only deepened. He began stalking her, watching her from afar, hiding in the shadows of her new life. In February 1999, Gladys met a man named James Preston at a restaurant. James, like her, was an accountant, but he also pursued his passion for music in his free time. There was an immediate connection between them, and soon they began dating. For the first time in a long while, Gladys felt happy, and she thought she had finally found someone who could give her the kind of love she deserved. But Agustin, still watching her closely, became more dangerous with each passing day. One evening, while James and Gladys were at her house, they heard a knock on the door. Agustin stood there, demanding to speak with her alone. When she refused and asked him to leave, he flew into a rage, hurling stones at her windows. Frightened, Gladys called the police, but in her effort to avoid escalating the situation, she chose not to press charges. This decision would later prove to be a grave mistake. As the months passed, her new relationship flourished. By the summer of 1999, James proposed to Gladys, and she joyfully accepted. They planned a beautiful wedding for September 26th and were set to leave for a honeymoon in Hawaii, where they would celebrate their love on a paradise island. Preparations for the wedding were in full swing, with friends and family invited to share in their joy. It seemed like nothing could stand in the way of Gladys's long-awaited happiness. But 2 weeks before the wedding, on September 12th, Gladys had an unsettling encounter. She was shopping at a mall when she unexpectedly ran into Agustin. He approached her as though nothing had changed, slipping his arm around her waist as if they were still together. His behavior was possessive, and the casual way he acted, despite their tumultuous past, sent chills down her spine. Knowing how unpredictable Agustin could be, Gladys didn't resist, fearing what might happen if she angered him in public. Instead, she feigned politeness, quickly excused herself, and left the mall under the pretense of needing to take care of an urgent matter. In reality, she was running from a man who still saw her as his possession. Agustin's presence lingered like a dark cloud over her, even as she prepared for her new life with James. It was a reminder that despite her best efforts to escape, Agustin was not ready to let her go, no matter the cost. On what should have been the happiest day of her life, Gladys Ricard was radiant in her dream wedding dress. Her home in Ridgefield was filled with the laughter of friends and family, all gathered to witness her long-awaited union with James Preston. The groom was already waiting at the church, while Gladys made her final preparations, surrounded by her loved ones. Photographers and videographers were on hand to capture every moment of her special day, with footage intended for a future family archive. But instead of becoming a cherished memory, those images were later shown in a courtroom as evidence in a murder trial. Around 3 in the afternoon, an ominous car driven by Agustin Garcia, Gladys's former boyfriend, arrived on the street outside her house. Despite the tumultuous end of their relationship, Agustin calmly stepped out of the car and approached the house. Gladys's brother, Juan, intercepted him at the entrance, demanding he leave. But Garcia insisted he had been invited, and Juan, unsure of how to proceed, reluctantly let him pass. Inside the house, Gladys was joyfully handing bouquets to her nieces, unaware of the looming danger. Suddenly, Agustin entered the room. Terrified, he opened his briefcase, took out a pistol, and without hesitation fired 3 shots at point-blank range. The first bullet struck her shoulder, the second pierced her chest, and the third hit her head, ensuring she had no chance of survival. The vibrant bride, full of hope and love, was dead before help could arrive. The medics who were called could do nothing but confirm her death. Agustin made no attempt to flee. He stood there, calm, as if resigned to his fate. He was promptly arrested at the scene, showing no remorse, only a cold readiness to confess to the heinous act he had just committed. During his initial interrogation, Agustin told a bizarre and twisted version of events. He claimed he had no idea Gladys was getting married that day. In his distorted reality, he was still in a relationship with her. He referred to their recent encounter at the mall where they had walked together, albeit awkwardly, implying that they were still a couple. According to his story, he was driving by her house as he often did, and upon seeing the crowd and numerous parked cars, decided to stop and see what was happening. When he realized that Gladys, the woman he still considered his partner, was marrying another man, he said he simply wanted to talk to her. However, according to him, things took a violent turn when Gladys's brother Juan and her son Davis attacked him in the living room. He claimed that in self-defense he pulled out his gun, and in the chaos, the bullets accidentally hit Gladys. In a final, far-fetched detail, Garcia insisted he had no memory of actually firing the shots. When his lawyers arrived, Garcia immediately retracted this statement. From that point on, he refused to cooperate with investigators, opting for silence. The prosecution gave him an opportunity to plead guilty and receive a lighter sentence, but Agustin refused, showing no signs of remorse or willingness to admit guilt. The case soon attracted widespread attention, and Agustin's legal team, determined to secure a victory, sought to transform the narrative. His defense hired some of the best and most high-profile human rights lawyers, determined to shift the blame away from Garcia and portray him as a victim of circumstance. Knowing that the best defense is often a strong offense, the legal team devised a strategy to paint Agustin as the wronged party. A man whose actions were the result of a misunderstanding and emotional turmoil rather than premeditated malice. The trial was set for October 2001, giving the defense ample time to strategize and build their case. The businessman, once regarded as a respectable man, saw his carefully crafted image crumble overnight. Now, in the public's eyes, he was no longer an admired figure, but a monster. Restoring his tarnished reputation seemed like an almost impossible task. Undeterred, his legal team sprang into action, not just in the courtroom but also in the court of public opinion. They wasted no time in working with the press, conducting interviews and holding press conferences, trying to shift the narrative in their client's favor. The defense mounted a multifaceted attack, portraying Gladys as a manipulative, gold-digging woman who had allegedly broken Agustin's heart. According to their version of events, the defendant had been a victim of betrayal, driven to desperation by Gladys's deceit. They claimed that Garcia only grabbed the gun in self-defense after being attacked by the victim's brother and son. To further influence public opinion, the defense relied heavily on accusations from human rights activists who cast Gladys in an unflattering light. Supposedly, while still involved with Garcia, Gladys had been carrying on an affair with James, all the while planning a secret wedding behind Agustine's back. She had allegedly continued to accept money and lavish gifts from Garcia even as she prepared to marry someone else. According to this narrative, the murder was not a premeditated crime, but a tragic instance of manslaughter, committed in the heat of passion and fueled by the supposed attack from Juan and Davis. As these claims made their way through the media, public opinion began to shift. Many now saw Gladys as the villain of the story, a woman who had cruelly deceived Agustin and abused his generosity. The defense's portrayal of events was so effective that the public started to believe Gladys had, in some twisted way, brought her fate upon herself. The victim's family fought to defend her honor, but it seemed that Agustin's legal team had won the battle for the hearts and minds of the public. However, the case took a devastating turn for the defense when a crucial piece of evidence surfaced: a videotape capturing the murder. On what should have been the happiest day of Gladys's life, a wedding photographer and videographer had been hired to document the celebration. Cameras had been set up throughout the house, including one in the living room, where it recorded every moment of the bride's final preparations. This same camera also captured the brutal killing in horrifying detail. The footage clearly showed Garcia, consumed by rage, approaching the bride with calculated intent. He calmly retrieved a gun from his briefcase and fired 3 shots at her at point-blank range. His actions were deliberate, and contrary to the defense's claims, there were no signs of Juan or Davis anywhere near him. The footage destroyed the defense's argument, revealing that Garcia had approached his victim with clear intent to kill, not in self-defense, but in cold blood. Once the existence of this videotape came to light, Garcia's attorneys scrambled to prevent it from being shown to the jury. They argued that it was too prejudicial and would make it impossible for their client to receive a fair trial. However, the judge, after reviewing the tape, ruled that it was highly relevant evidence and allowed it to be entered into the case file. The trial for Gladys Ricart's murder commenced in the fall of 2001. Family members and friends of the victim testified that Agustin had been stalking Gladys after their breakup, determined to make her life miserable. Despite his increasingly erratic behavior, she had never reported him to the police, a tragic decision that ultimately cost her her life. Those close to her described her as too kind-hearted, too forgiving, to see him as the threat he had become. The damning evidence, of course, was the videotape, which left no room for doubt. Every detail of the cold-blooded murder was captured on film, and the jury could not ignore the calculated manner in which Garcia carried out the killing. On February 1, 2002, the jury found Garcia guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Though he attempted to appeal the verdict, citing temporary insanity brought on by the shock of Gladys's wedding, his plea fell on deaf ears.